This is the Lighting Fires podcast, supported by Henley Business School.
At that point, I think the odd sense of the world was spinning quickly, but so much of it was on pause because of lockdowns. And my office, which I'm sure you'll ask about later, was at that point based in our bathroom because it was the only place that I could lock myself away from my 2-year-old and my 4-year-old without being interrupted. And just sitting in this odd bubble of trying to angle cameras for online meetings away from the toilet, the shower and the sink.
I did get some flashes in the toilet.
You did. I would angle it around. Was like, just to be clear to anyone listening, I wasn't using it at the time, just to make that very clear.
Welcome to the Lighting Fires podcast. My name is Julie Williams and I'm a coach. I have a master's in coaching and behavioural change, over 10 years of running my own coaching practice, and 15 years in marketing leadership roles, including Accenture, where I worked with Microsoft. In my work, I gain the benefit of walking with people through their lives for a short time. So on this podcast, you'll get to hear from people experiencing key moments of change in their business and personal lives. We'll hear what lit their fires and the techniques that created significant shifts. I hope you find their story inspiring. In this episode, I talked to Lorraine Briffitt, Chief Executive of Connect Reading, a charity that makes the town of Reading better for everyone by bringing together businesses, charities and other organisations to benefit the local community, economy and environment. In this episode, Lorraine and I discuss the importance of defining your values as a leader, the topic of imposter syndrome, and the power of knowing how to handle difficult conversations. I must warn you, there is some strong language in this episode. So today I would like to welcome Lorraine Briffitt. Lorraine, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm a chief exec of a charity, I'm a trustee, I'm a facetious human, hugely so, and a work in progress. And I suppose my biggest passions are positive change, whether it's in me, in my circumstances, or most of all around me in society.
Thank you. And we first met as I was one of the co-founders of Coaching Reading. I still am, and I got involved with offering pro bono coaching to charity and community leaders in the Reading area, and you had just taken over as Chief Exec of Connect Reading, I think.
Yes, my predecessor spoke very highly of the opportunities. I think she'd met with you and Debs in maybe the November, and then she stepped down in December. And you were our first ever, and as it turned out, due to the gigantic lockdown that was coming around the corner we didn't know about, our February networking in 2020.
Yes, I remember it well. Suddenly everything changed very soon after that. So we went on to do some coaching work together during the lockdown, and I thought perhaps we could talk about that today. And I wonder if you could start by telling us maybe a little bit about your backstory, so prior to becoming the Chief Exec of Connect Reading.
I suppose I spent most of my professional life working in the charity sector, a little bit in the public sector, dabbling in the NHS, and then running away due to the fact that they would name systems PMS, a computer system. I mean, really, honestly, it really did have that sort of temperament to it, to be honest. A little bit of dabbling in the private sector as well after I left university, but I just never really found the right niche until I kind of settled into spaces that had a sort of non-profit drive. And before I came to Connect Reading, I was doing a lot of part-time stuff as well as being a parent and navigating a recently diagnosed long-term immuno illness. And so I was a funeral celebrant, I was a consultant, a mum, a trustee, I think on 2 or 3 things, and about 3 other steering groups as well. So yeah, I had loads of time. And then thought I'd take on a 3-day-a-week chief exec job.
Okay, so there's a lot going on in there.
Always.
We could unpack all of that,
but
let's not. So fast forward to Connect Reading, And you had taken on a big role with big challenges, plus then suddenly we had the lockdowns to contend with, and also the context of the Black Lives Matter campaigns that were happening at that time. So why did you come to coaching?
I had been very lucky to actually benefit from some pro bono coaching a couple of times during my first ever chief exec position between 2013 and 2016. And it was I would say it was foundational in terms of finding myself as a leader. I had led many other things up to that point on a slightly smaller scale. And then the job that I took on in 2013 was leading a charity of 6 projects with kind of 30 staff. And that was quite a jump from managing one project within that same charity. And I think navigating my own understanding of myself as a leader, as a person within that context, and just the strange dance that you do when you go from leading something within the context of someone else's organisation in comparison to then having to lead the whole thing, and having those same people and the same interactions, but they come out in a different way due to a different power dynamic. And so when I took on the Connect Reading role, there were only 2 of us on the staff team, quality, not quantity. And obviously with the challenges of lockdown, when you've just taken over a networking-based organisation and also sort of pushed through significant changes like moving offices and rebranding all within 3 months on 3 days a week, to say that I've felt slightly overwhelmed is probably an understatement. And having heard you speak at our networking and you were sort of talking about offering pro bono coaching, it felt like a very necessary and timely connection.
And I remember our mutual friend, Debs Jeffries, said to me one day, I've got to introduce you to Lorraine. You two are going to get on like a house on fire.
Right.
And I think you could really support each other as well, which is very much true. So let's think back to some of the coaching topics then that we got into. What would you say was one of the main things that we were tackling back then?
I probably have to say imposter syndrome, which is irritating because I wish it wasn't. That is a very frequent awareness that I have, I think, of myself, probably throughout my whole life, actually. And especially when you face leadership and responsibility, to see that as something that you hold as a privilege, but you also understand that you're there not just because there was nobody else to do it, and holding those 2 things in tandem.
Okay, yeah. And can you remember how the imposter syndrome showed up, or the thinking patterns that were there for you, or the impact that it was having on your job?
If I start on the thinking patterns, just being reminded of some of the things I was saying to myself almost brings up that same level of kind of that sort of jarring sense inside. I apparently was saying of myself that at some point everybody will realise that I've done absolutely nothing, which I think, if I'm honest now, I'm like, what a ridiculous thing to say, because I'm not somebody who sits still for very long, and I'm always seeking to do my best and sort of go beyond.
And I should make it clear that when you talked at the time about feeling like you weren't achieving anything, I didn't burst out laughing then. It's in hindsight that I completely agree. It seems a ridiculous statement considering how much you do achieve all the time.
So at that point, I think the odd sense of the world was spinning quickly, but so much of it was on pause because of lockdowns. And my office, which I'm sure you'll ask about later, was at that point based in our bathroom, because it was the only place that I could lock myself away from my 2-year-old and my 4-year-old without being interrupted. And just sitting in this odd bubble of trying to angle cameras for online meetings away from the toilet, the shower and the sink.
I did get some flashes of the toilet.
You did. I would angle it around. It was like, just to be clear to anyone listening, I wasn't using it at the time, just to make that very clear. So I think the odd context I found myself in, but then the fact that we were supporting so many charities who were just flat out in supporting people in significant crisis on the front line. And in my previous jobs in the non-profit sector, it's always been frontline. And so normally I'd be out volunteering in the red light district to support women out of prostitution and trafficking, or supporting sort of food bank stuff, or making sure that people were safe, or supporting young people on the edge of sort of mental health crises. And this felt very odd, to be in your bathroom, sitting there, hearing these stories of things happening on the front line, and then just feeling a bit powerless about making a positive impact. And knowing that the network was there to support these people, but also who were delivering the frontline services, but not really knowing how to do that because you couldn't sort of reach them, get things to them and things like that. So that was a very odd feeling of feeling a bit removed, I think.
Yeah. If you're listening to this and you're interested in training as a coach, I can highly recommend the Professional Certificate in Executive Coaching, or even the Masters at Henley Business School. It is the best investment I have made in myself and my business. The course is led by research, so you know it has academic rigour, and the tools and techniques you learn are highly practical. You get the opportunities to practice, you build confidence. I also gained friendships for life, a community that's continued to support me. I can highly recommend it. So if you decide to take the plunge and contact Henley about the certificate programme, do mention the Lighting Fires podcast. So what was useful then in the coaching? What helped to create some shifts around the imposter syndrome or outside of the coaching?
Well, I think coaching at its best, it supports the ecosystem of a person's awareness that they need to have some sort of change or shift go on within themselves to see that change outside of themselves in the context they're in. And it was a lifeline, I think, to have you as a mirror or reflection back of the things I was seeing in myself that perhaps were not true reality, but also knowing that there was someone who was safe to say that to. Because sometimes you could have said, I could have said that, and you could have laughed, and you didn't. You listened, and I think hearing somebody else reflect back what you said can sometimes either highlight the absurdity of what you say about yourself, or just allow some grace to notice the disparity between your internal voice and what happens on the interior of our own experience, and then what happens in the context of that in terms of the exterior experience.
Yeah. I think I completely agree. I'm just reflecting back on a conversation I had with a counsellor that I occasionally visit recently, and I said something out loud to him that I don't think I've ever said to anybody, and he could have laughed because I think it would have been fair enough, but actually he just listened and he played it back to me. And he enabled me just to, almost like it was holding this thought in our hands and just looking at it from different angles or perspectives. And it really created a very significant shift in a very short period of time. So I think it is often just having that other person that you trust to hold something and to have a look at it together is very helpful. So I remember that we worked on you creating a mantra or something that you could say to yourself to reinforce the kind of the self-belief and to help you with the imposter syndrome. And in the world of coaching, this is known as an anchor. And so what we do is create, it could be a metaphor or it could be an image. When I say image, an image in your mind, in your imagination, or it could be a physical image that you draw, or a statement that you can repeat on a regular basis, which just helps to lay down a kind of new neural pathway in the brain, which creates a kind of a new thinking pattern that you can go to much more swiftly when you need to call upon it. Can you remember what your statement was?
I'm not going to say yes because you actually told me because you read the notes. I'm not going to pretend I have that excellent memory about myself, or that I have in fact carried on using it probably beyond the first year of very helpful use. It was, people don't have to like me, I just have to be kind and honest. And I still find it quite funny even just reading it now. because I think I have moved past that desperate sense of everything I do needs to be approved by people, perhaps sometimes too much so. But I think that dedication to kindness and to honesty has been sort of one of my core values going through. And having recently actually come out of some conversations with a friend who was supporting me through a very difficult time in the charity the last 3 months, she signposted me to Brené Brown's sort of values and how to sort of almost mine through how your top 3 or top 2 would be. And I just found that offensive that I would have to pick just 2 things. But one of them was authenticity, which obviously resonates with honesty, and the other one was kindness. And so I think that was a pivotal moment of mining out a bit of who am I and why is that important. And if people don't like it, that's okay. I'm still me and I'm valid to be me in those spaces.
Yeah. And I hope you don't mind me saying, so with an anchor, something like this, it's important to repeat this thought regularly. And it can be very useful to connect it to something that you will repeatedly do during the day. So some clients might link it to brushing their teeth, for example, or putting the kettle
What
on.
you're saying is normal people who didn't have their office in a bathroom might have connected it to perhaps more average practices. But
What did you connect it to?
Well, having been able to see said bathroom all the time whenever I was in my work context, I figured that the thing I would do quite regularly, I am glad to report, was going to the toilet. And so I had to think chalk pens, and so I just wrote on the shower wall next to where I went to the loo, which my husband found quite funny.
And I think whatever works, right? If that's what
Sure,
works.
generally people don't get outed about these practices, or in a larger, more public space, but sure, yeah. I think anyone who does know me has probably come to expect this behaviour.
And my recollection of some of the conversations about imposter syndrome was that you felt that if you could move past it, you could really free up so much else, and you could kind of take care of yourself. So that was very much linked to leadership and resilience and your energy levels as well. And that, if you could be kind to yourself, then you could perhaps be more comfortable, you can relax more. Does any of that sound familiar?
Yeah, I think the resilience thing for anybody during lockdowns was a problem, whether you're continuing to work in an ordinary pattern, if someone's in sort of frontline blue light services or businesses that didn't necessarily see a change in their work pattern, still that sense of national anxiety around how long will this go on, what will happen, and the strange dance in and out of lockdowns. Resilience was a frequently discussed desire or topic, I suppose, in a lot of leadership spaces. I think for me, holding on to that mantra and the anchor of that, it was how to be kind and honest with myself as much as with others, and that has continued to be a learning curve for me, I would say, in terms of my autoimmune condition, which is myasthenia gravis. Managing energy, managing brain space, learning more about my own patterns of thought and desire to fix things, and being on the go a lot. I think trying to find a better rhythm of that was the start of sort of changes over the last 4 years, and I think that has helped, but I'm still a work in progress.
Are you feeling stuck and need some help moving forwards? At Lighting Fires, I work with business leaders, future leaders and their teams to ignite their full leadership potential. Whether you're a business owner or leading in an organisation, we can work together to create a programme tailored to your priorities. Throughout our coaching together, I see my clients' confidence and capabilities grow as they gain a greater understanding of how they work, learn to make quicker decisions, and develop a vision for their role and a plan on how to get there. Through the challenges and the breakthroughs, you'll have me by your side. Get in touch on LinkedIn or email me julie@lightingfires.co.uk. So if somebody else is listening to this and they're experiencing imposter syndrome, what would you say to them?
Talk to somebody. Don't be embarrassed. You're not alone. I think there's a tendency for women to feel this more than men. Unfortunately, we exist still within many patriarchal constructs, and whilst it can be perhaps more noticeable to name the silencing of female voices in public spaces, actually it has a parallel effect of silencing our voices to ourselves, and that is very, very significantly seen, I think, and felt in terms of the mental and physical, and how those two things are deeply linked, and recognizing how to listen not just to our internal voices mentally, but to listen to our bodies, and how those two things are intrinsically linked, and we cannot escape that. And again, I think that's part of my ongoing journey, having recognized what was happening in my head, to recognize what's happening in my body, and not assume that I'm not supposed to be in a place. Because when you are in a place in your body, you occupy space in that. And if you continually feel that you shouldn't be there, you shrink yourself and you sort of essentially oppress yourself, even if the situation is oppressive. And so that's just another layer that you have to break through. So talk to others about it, and don't layer more shame on yourself for feeling about it, or sort of blaming, I think, because it is a sad truth for many women, and also for men, I think, who find themselves in leadership positions or places of responsibility where they feel like the odd one out for whatever reason.
That's really insightful. Thank you for sharing that. Thinking back to the coaching, were there other topics that you've reflected on that might be interesting to talk about?
I think having supported a number of people to access the coaching that you've offered through Coaching Reading, a lot of the time they start talking about a difficult conversation that they know they probably need to have at some point. And for me at that point, there were some pretty difficult relationships I was facing. Some of them were organisational in terms of what I had inherited as an organisation, and identifying how that sat perhaps adjacent to or in competition with other organisations, and trying to unpick that, and then noticing that alongside that there were also personality clashes, is probably too strong a word, but perhaps at the time I think I would have said clashes, with individuals from me to them, and having not really anticipated that would be the case because I'd known them before I took the role on. So being able to identify how to face those difficult conversations by firstly not really constantly holding on to this thing of everyone has to like me, feeling that I wanted that to be the case because I wanted people to like me, because I thought in my head that my role was me. And I think that is an ongoing journey for many people, especially when they run their own business, that you are the brand. And I remember arguing with a person who redid our website, who was amazing, that it was all about, it was the charity, it's not me, and then being like, no, it's you. And I was like, I still don't really like it, but there we go. I think we then struggle with that when people say no to your work, that they are saying no to you, and that's a strange continuum. So I think at that point, difficult conversations was one of the biggest comedy moments, and also one of the most significant changes in terms of the coaching impact.
Okay, I think that's really interesting, that point about when you run your own business, or whether if you're the face of an organisation, particularly a small one, there's so much of you wrapped up in it. And I think when I first set up my coaching business, I probably didn't recognise how much of it was me in terms of the brand. And actually that led to some times of real exhaustion, because I always want to do my best with the clients that I work with. I work hard. I see myself as, I hate the word journey, but it does feel like I'm walking along a path with them during the coaching, and maybe we're just together in that moment of time. And so I think there have been times when my identity has been so wrapped up in my coaching work that I have had to, over the last couple of years, try to separate out the two. And I think it was probably a bit intentional at the beginning for it to become part of my identity, because I was leaving the corporate world and that was such a shift. And I loved coaching so much, so passionate about it. You know, when I first discovered it, it was like this whole new amazing world that completely thrilled me and does still thrill me. But it's not that healthy to be that closely identified with the work you do. It can definitely lead to some exhaustion at times.
Yeah, I think there seem to be, in discussions around whether you are what you do or, you know, the compartmentalising, I actually think it's probably slightly more nuanced than that. It's not either or. I think there's no shame in identifying yourself through your brand or vice versa, or, you know, pouring yourself into something that you're passionate about. You know, people wouldn't get good things done if that didn't happen, if we just sort of switched a flick. No, switch to flick, do the switching of the flicks. You know, if we were able to do that, I think actually the shifts we would see within ourselves and within the things we work within and that we're dedicated to wouldn't necessarily move so much. It wouldn't shift the dial. However, I think the hard part, and actually that was probably more difficult to do during the pandemic, was in a lockdown, how do you break state between the doing and the job role and the whoing? And the difference between to do and to be was very, very blurred. And sadly, I think that's probably one of the things we've continued to have to try and navigate in a hybrid world, that you bring your work home and your home to work, which is probably actually better, I think, in terms of bringing your home life and your context to work, because there's more authenticity to that. But the opposite of that in terms of work home is very hard to leave that at the door, or to have a regular practice that allows us to change state between the two.
Yeah, and that actually came up a lot in the coaching work that I was doing during lockdowns. Was so many people working from home and having no boundaries. You know, they'd finish work possibly at their kitchen table and then start their childcare duties, their cooking, or and no ability to just decompress or switch off or shift roles. So yeah, and I do think it continues to be a challenge for people. So coming back to the topic of difficult conversations, what was it that happened during the coaching sessions that enabled you to have those, would you say?
I think the first one was the mantra of, this person doesn't have to like me. I mean, I'd love to know whether they do or not now. I would say letting myself off the hook for that kind of, I must have everybody like what we're doing and like why we are and like what I am and what it's about, and just stop trying so hard, FFS. And then secondly, I think being able to untangle the difference between organisational clashes, again being too strong a word, but disparities maybe in terms of trajectory of delivery, passion, vision, values, etc. The difference between that and then the difference between people and humans, and how often our organisations become like the person leading them, and that is part of the course. It's normal. It's not a bad thing, but it means that you need to own the difference between those two things. I think that was really helpful. In terms of the conversation itself, I just remember doing some constellation stuff with you and the amusing random stuff that I found in my bedroom and bathroom to represent people and situations.
And with constellations, which is a coaching technique which allows you to recreate a scenario on a table in front of you using objects that represent different people or different things that are happening in the situation. And it's fantastic for giving you a sense of perspective and looking at what is happening in this situation right now, but also then recreating a version of this picture that is of how you'd like it to be, because that can just suddenly give you these really unexpected insights into, oh, so that's something I could start doing differently, or that's a different attitude that I could have to this situation or to this person, that can just make these tiny little shifts that do influence that system that you're in.
Yeah, I remember picking some very amusing items to represent different people according to what toys the kids had left in the room, and seeing how the sort of almost like the side conversation was the one to have, not the one face to face that felt more confrontational. And it reminded me a lot in terms of the shift of how I understood myself and my tendency towards, right, let's just get this done.
I remember during my training as a coach, we had a constellations expert, John Whittington, and he came in to run a half-day workshop with all us trainee coaches. And it was so eye-opening, fascinating. People would offer to bring their topic to the group, and they would go around and pick different people to represent maybe their mother or their father or different people in a work scenario. And I remember one person picking out somebody to represent money in a situation, and there was just this huge outpouring of historical, not just emotion, just energy, stuff that has seemed to have been caught up inside this person and their narratives that they've been telling themselves for a long time about a situation, and it seemed to completely clear things for them and offer them clarity and new perspective. So it is a really fascinating tool and technique. I recently did constellations with a client who is really into Dungeons and Dragons. So she had this box of Dungeons and Dragons characters right next to her desk, and she was like, this is amazing, I'm going to get really into
that's awesome.
this.
I like that.
Yeah, that was really fun. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to get you to pick a question out of the hat. So if you'd like to have a rummage around.
This is one. Oh my gosh. I kind of thought it would be this one.
Which is it?
I mean, am I allowed to use the word or not?
Okay, we're gonna do a swear warning now.
Beep, 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 beep.
And then you can...
I really try not to swear for the rest of this. So I
question.
feel like I've achieved something, and now here I am being invited to swear. So, question number 5. Biggest fuck up. Is this in the context of life or in terms of the coaching conversations we were having?
I think it's in the context of your leadership journey so far.
I mean, to be fair, there are a lot. Okay, so when I first had my probably biggest shift in terms of stepping from one position into a more significant is perhaps too binary a context, but it felt like a very significant shift in terms of stepping into a chief exec role from a project manager role. I was going through quite a lot of trying to do sort of self-learning and encourage people in that journey. I knew that I was a very different personality and level of experience to my predecessor, both in terms of gender, age. I mean, the list went pretty long. And so I thought it would be great to do the change cycle with them, which, with hindsight, was perhaps not the best timing when everyone is still in denial. I say everyone, to be fair, it was only about 2 out of 6 of the other managers. So there was a person in the organisation who'd been there since it started. So this was nearly their 20th year. At that point, I was 30, early 30s. I was super excited about sharing this with them. I was like, this is going to be amazing. We're going to see so many shifts. People are going to own their shit. It's going to be awesome. Or it's going to be freaking awkward, which is what it was. So I had this gigantic piece of paper on the floor with the change cycle and talked about like the different things that were coming down the line in terms of wanting to reset the vision together, talked about how isn't it going to be great that we can do all this together, and then invited people to share. And to give them their respect, a couple of people really did, and they were like, yeah, this is a difficult transition, but we're really excited that you're here. And then these other 2 people, it was just so painful. It was just so cringy. They couldn't see the point in doing the exercise. They didn't want to say where they felt they were on it because they thought it was stupid. And it actually caused more divisions because the people who were trying to like lean into it a bit and be a bit self-reflective they could almost sense that resentment of like, why are you joining in? Yeah. It then probably took, I'd say, about a year to get to a point where the most significant stuck person could have a more respectful conversation with me. I never got to the stage where I felt I could manage the individual in a way that they needed to be managed, because they'd spent so long essentially a law unto themselves. And the better decision would have been to do the change thing one-to-one, not as a group. And the better decision would have frankly been probably to let them go much, much sooner. So yes, so that was a significant fuck up on my part.
Oh gosh, that sounds quite excruciating, but quite funny. And it's reminding me about how, as new leaders or taking on new positions in leadership, the fact is that we do often just have to change up that team that's working for us and make those really difficult decisions, and do it in a way that is as kind and generous as you can be, and accepting that, you know, we're on different paths and change needs to happen. But I think it takes experience to learn.
Yes, it does. I think the idea of being able to recast a new vision for people to join in with, you have to have an understanding as to whether firstly those people really gave a shit about what the old vision was or not, and if they didn't, it's highly unlikely they're going to give a shit about the one you're going to want to set with them. And then secondly, that you can teach an old personage new tricks, but you can't lead them to water, or some mixing of those metaphors.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. I
Okay.
love that story, and it's quite brave to admit it as well. Okay then, so what's next for Lorraine Briffitt?
A gajillion meetings, marking of the new year. So I guess for me, it has been a fun leadership journey, insert alternate F word as needed. Over the last 4 years, it has been very eye-opening in terms of self-reflection and sort of tapping into some of those previous coaching conversations, and then having the opportunity to benefit from some throughout the last 4 years as well. I'm not really sure. I think in terms of Connect Wedding, the charity I currently lead, we are facing a time of significant change, as is so much of the non-profit world, given the cost of living crisis and multiple other crises within that. I think I'm entering a slightly better self-awareness of the connection between mind and body. So hopefully some more kindness, internal kindness, and that sort of ongoing authenticity and dedication to do well, but don't do all the time.
Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
As I listen back to this interview with Lorraine, I'm thinking about imposter syndrome and how often this arises in my coaching work. It's a phenomenon typically associated with high-achieving women, and of course it often crops up for men too. The civil rights activist and poet Maya Angelou received numerous prestigious literary and humanitarian awards in her lifetime, and over 50 honorary degrees, being awarded the highest civilian honour by President Obama. And yet she stated, "I have written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out now." So my top tips for this episode, in regard to imposter syndrome, perhaps just start to notice any thoughts that come to your mind that relate to inadequacy, that someone is going to find you out. Write them down, and if you've used the top tips from my previous episodes, you can compare them to the achievements that you have noted. Also, find someone you trust to talk to. I guarantee that this person will either be feeling the same way about themselves, or they'll help you to see that there isn't so much truth in these thoughts after all. My second top tip is to dedicate some time to discovering or reviewing your personal values. Think about your values and beliefs, the principles that you hold dear and that drive your decision making. as these can change as you enter different phases of your life. For example, it might be about openness and honesty, or a sense of achievement in your life, or financial security. There are many options to choose from. Next, gently challenge yourself. Do these values still hold true? Or are they perhaps from a phase in your past? Can you think of 3 examples where you've demonstrated these values recently? A useful website for exploring your values is brenebrown.com, from the academic and podcaster of the same name. And also her book is Dare to Lead. I highly recommend it. If you'd like to find out how we could work together, you can visit my website, www.lightingfires.co.uk, email me at julie@lightingfires.co.uk, or contact me on LinkedIn, Julie Williams, MSc. If you found this podcast helpful, please leave a 5-star rating so others just like you can find me and benefit from these stories. Thank you for listening to the Lighting Fires podcast. I'll be back soon with more conversations with my wonderful clients reflecting on their coaching journeys.